Nombulelo's knees struck the marble floor just as the diamond necklace spilled from her torn handbag. Laughter exploded across the grand ballroom. Thief Zanele screamed, pointing with trembling rage, while guests lifted their phones to record the humiliation. Security closed in. Madlamini ordered them to force the poor girl to apologize on her knees. Nombulelo's lips parted, but no plea came out. Her eyes were fixed on the entrance. Then 3 black luxury cars stopped outside. The music died, because the men stepping through those doors were the 3 most feared billionaires in South Africa, and they were walking straight toward the girl everyone had just destroyed. What would you do if the person everyone mocked turned out to be the one they should have feared? Tell me where you're watching from and your local time right now. If you love powerful emotional stories with shocking twists, subscribe and stay with us for the next part. 3 days before the ballroom turned into a public execution, Nombulelo woke to the sound of coughing. It came from the thin mattress in the corner, from the small body curled beneath a faded blanket, from the child who had learned too young how to hide pain so adults would not worry. Siyabonga tried to cover his mouth, but the cough ripped through him anyway, sharp and dry and frightening in the dark. Nombulelo was already beside him before the second one came. She touched his forehead first, then his chest. Then she pressed her ear gently against his back, the way the clinic nurse had shown her months ago. "Easy," she whispered. "Slow breaths. Look at me." The room they shared behind Madlamini's house was hardly a room at all. It had a cracked cement floor, a rusted window that did not fully close, and one naked bulb that flickered whenever the main house used too much electricity. At dawn, the cold came through the walls as if the bricks themselves resented the poor. But Nombulelo's voice stayed warm. Siyabonga blinked up at her with tired eyes, too old for his narrow face. He was 10, but sickness had carved carefulness into him. He never asked for toys, never cried when the medicine ran out, never complained when dinner was only porridge thinned with hot water. "I'm okay," he lied. Nombulelo smiled in the way she always smiled when both of them knew the truth, and neither of them could afford to say it aloud. "You are terrible at lying," she said softly. A tiny laugh escaped him, then turned into another cough. She reached for the tin box beneath the bed and opened it. Inside lay their kingdom: 2 tablets wrapped in tissue, a half bottle of cough syrup, 3 folded clinic receipts, and a note with a number she had called too many times. Surgery estimate. Every time she looked at it, her chest tightened. She measured the syrup, helped Siyabonga sit up, and watched him drink. Then she tucked the blanket around him, smoothing its frayed edges, as if care could mend cloth lungs and fate all at once. "I'll come back early," she said. He caught her wrist before she could stand. "If she asks again," he whispered, "say no." Nombulelo's face stilled. Children noticed more than adults liked to believe. Siyabonga had heard the arguments from the main house. He had heard Madlamini's sharp voice, heard Zanele's laughter, heard the name of the man they wanted Nombulelo to marry passed around like a business arrangement. Say yes, and the hospital money appears. Say no, and let the boy get weaker. That was how evil worked in houses like Madlamini's, not with knives, with bargains. Nombulelo brushed his hair back from his forehead. "Don't think about grown people's problems." "That means it's bad," Siyabonga said. His honesty struck her harder than any insult ever had. She bent and kissed his temple. "Rest. I'll bring bread tonight." He did not ask from where. He already knew there might not be enough money for bread. Outside the yard was still grey with early morning. The chickens scratched near the fence. A cracked bucket lay overturned beside the tap. The main house stood a few steps away, larger painted olive with the smell of frying fat and tea that would never be offered to her unless there were leftovers. Nombulelo crossed the yard and entered through the back. Madlamini was already seated at the table in a bright robe, as if wealth had mistaken the house for its own. Zanele sat opposite her, scrolling through her phone. Glossy lips curled in amusement at something on the screen. A plate full of eggs and sausages sat between them. No third plate had been set. It never was. "You're late," Madlamini snapped without looking up. "It's not even 5:30 yet," Nombulelo said carefully. The older woman's eyes lifted. Cold, warning, predatory. "So now you answer back." Nombulelo lowered her gaze. She had learned the choreography of survival long ago. Too much silence invited accusation. Too much dignity invited punishment. "I was helping Sayabonga," she said. Zanele clicked her tongue. "That sick child will swallow all the money in this house and still die ungrateful." Nombulelo turned so quickly the chair leg scraped the floor. For 1 second, true anger flashed across her face. It was dangerous, that anger. Too clean, too visible. Zanele leaned back, satisfied. She enjoyed it when Nombulelo forgot her place. It made the next humiliation more entertaining. "Don't speak about him like that," Nombulelo said. Madlamini put down her cup with deliberate calm. That was worse than shouting. Shouting was weather. Calm was calculation. "And how should we speak?" she asked. "Like he is a prince, we feed him, we house him, we keep both of you alive. Yet every day I look at you and see expense." Nombulelo's hands tightened at her sides. "Feed, house, keep alive." The language of people who turned crumbs into chains. She wanted to remind Madlamini that the money sent by strangers in unmarked envelopes had never reached the clinic. That the clothes donated for Siabonga had been sold. That the extra wages Nombulelo earned washing dishes after midnight somehow disappeared before morning. But truth inside that house was like lighting a match in a room full of gas. So she swallowed it. Madlamini studied her for a long moment, then smiled. It was not kindness. It was strategy, putting on perfume. "Sit," she said. Nombulelo did not move. "I said sit." She obeyed. Zanele folded her arms, already enjoying what came next. "There is a man," Madlamini began, "a respectable man. Wealthy, established, a man who understands gratitude." Nombulelo felt the air change. There it was, the transaction. "I'm not interested," she said. Madlamini laughed once. "Interest is a luxury for girls who bring something to the table." Nombulelo said nothing. "The man has seen you," the older woman continued. "He is willing to marry you despite circumstances, despite poverty, despite not being beautiful enough for their standards, despite not having a father to defend her, despite being useful only when cornered." Zanele leaned in. "You should be thankful. No decent man would choose a girl who smells like dishwater and clinic halls." Still Nombulelo said nothing, because silence was the only shield left when words were turned against you. Madlamini's voice hardened. "He will pay generously. With that money, Siabonga can see the best doctors, maybe even have the procedure he needs." There it was, not even hidden now. A child's heartbeat set against a woman's freedom. Nombulelo slowly lifted her eyes. What kind of man buys a wife by threatening a sick boy's life? For a moment, even Zanele looked startled. Then Madlamini's hand struck the table. "A man better than any who would look at you for free." The words landed cruel and practiced. They had been waiting. Nombulelo stood. No. Madlamini stood too. The room seemed smaller, suddenly pressed tight by years of resentment. "You think pride will save you?" Madlamini hissed. "You think decency will pay hospital bills? Every day that boy breathes under this roof is because I allow it." Nombulelo's face changed. Not broken, not frightened. Something steadier, more dangerous. "He breathes because God has not forgotten him," she said. "Not because you are merciful." A sharp silence followed. Zanele stared. Madlamini's nostrils flared. Then the older woman laughed, but there was no humor in it. "We will see how holy you remain when desperation comes to your door tonight." Nombulelo turned and walked toward the sink before her knees could betray her. She washed plates, scrubbed counters, swept floors, carried hot water, ironed Zanele's dress for a lunch date she did not deserve. All morning the threat hung in the air like smoke. By noon she left for her shift at the small cafe near the taxi rank. The city was alive with motion vendors, shouting buses, groaning heels, clicking engines, coughing black breath into the heat. Johannesburg never stopped long enough to pity anyone. It simply moved around suffering and called that strength. At the cafe, Nombulelo tied on her apron and began the lunch rush. She moved quickly, balancing trays, wiping tables, apologizing for delays that were not her fault. Most customers barely saw her. Some saw too much. The poor were invisible until someone needed a target. Near 3 o'clock, a businessman in an expensive watch stood to leave and forgot a thick roll of cash on the table. Nombulelo noticed it before he reached the door. "Sir," she called. He turned, patted his jacket, then looked surprised. She held out the money. He studied her face as if testing it for cracks. "You could have kept it." "I know," she said. He took the cash slowly. "Most people would." Nombulelo gave the smallest shrug. "Most people are not trying to sleep at night." Something unreadable moved through his expression. Respect, perhaps, or shame. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a smaller note. "For your honesty." She stepped back. "No, thank you." Now he looked genuinely confused. Why? Because money given for goodness often came with invisible strings? Because she was tired of being bought in pieces? Because once you started selling your silence, your gratitude, your dignity, people assumed your soul was negotiable too. "I returned what was yours," she said. "That is all." The man left without another word. Her manager had watched the exchange from behind the counter. Later, when the cafe emptied, he approached her with narrowed eyes. "You refused a tip?" "Yes." "Are you foolish?" "Maybe," she said. He stared at her, then snorted. "Or maybe you're the only clean thing in this city." By evening, her feet burned, her shoulders ached. She counted her wages in the alley behind the cafe, and knew instantly they would not be enough, not for the medicine, not for bread, not for hope. Then she found the envelope tucked into her bag. No name, no message, just money. Again. Her breath caught. For a wild second, relief rushed through her so hard it hurt. Sayabonga's tablets, bread, bus fare to the clinic. One more week bought from the mouth of disaster. Then she froze, because across the alley, half hidden by the fading light, stood Zanele, smiling. Zanele was still smiling when Nombulelo looked up from the envelope. Not a warm smile, not even a triumphant one. It was the smile of someone who had just confirmed a private suspicion and was already deciding how to use it. The alley behind the cafe smelled of old oil, rain-stained brick and spoiled fruit from the market bin at the corner. Evening light lay across the pavement in thin orange strips. People moved past the mouth of the alley without seeing the danger inside it. That was how danger liked to live in public, but just out of reach of compassion. Nombulelo closed her fingers around the envelope. "What are you doing here?" she asked. Zanele leaned one shoulder against the wall, elegant even in cruelty. Her dress was cream, her hair perfectly laid, her gold earrings catching the light with every small movement of her head. She looked like the kind of woman magazines called graceful and older women called blessed. Only those who lived near her long enough learned that beauty could rot from the inside and still shine on the surface. "I could ask you the same thing," Zanele said lightly. "Though I suppose this is exactly where one finds girls like you. In alleys, counting money." Nombulelo slipped the envelope into her bag. "That money is mine now," she said. Zanele laughed softly. That sounded almost brave. Nombulelo kept her face still. Inside her thoughts were racing. Had Zanele followed her? Had she put the envelope there herself? Had Madlamini sent her? There were too many traps in that house to trust coincidence. Zanele straightened and stepped closer. Mother said you refused. I did. And yet here you are, still broke, still desperate, still pretending you have choices. Nombulelo's jaw tightened. Why are you here? To help you understand something. Zanele's voice dropped. People like us do not ask twice. When we offer you a way out, you take it. If you refuse, then don't complain when life crushes you. People like us. The words were familiar. The invisible fence. The sentence that made bloodlines sound like bank accounts and kindness sound like weakness. Nombulelo lifted her chin. People like you, Zanele smiled again, but now the edges were sharp. The people who belong in rooms that matter. Nombulelo looked at her for a long second. Then she said quietly, A room does not become important because you stand in it. Zanele's smile vanished. There it was. A clean strike. Rare but real. For 1 second, Nombulelo saw naked hatred rise in her cousin's eyes before vanity covered it again. You should be careful, Zanele said. Pride looks ugly on poor women, and cruelty looks ugly on everyone, Nombulelo replied. The alley went silent. Even the city noise beyond it seemed to step back. Zanele took one more step forward until only a breath of space remained between them. You think because you work hard, the world owes you fairness. It doesn't. Some people are born to be looked at. Some are born to serve. The sooner you accept that, the easier your life becomes. Nombulelo's fingers curled around the strap of her bag. She wanted to shout. She wanted to throw the envelope at her. She wanted for once to let rage speak louder than survival. But rage did not buy medicine. So she said only, Move. Zanele searched her face for humiliation and found none. That seemed to insult her more than any argument could have. She stepped aside with a little laugh. Fine. Go home. Mother has news for you. That was worse than a threat because it carried certainty. Nombulelo walked past her without another word, but every nerve in her body stayed alert. By the time she reached the taxi rank, the envelope in her bag felt heavier than stones. On the ride home she opened it. There was enough money for Siyabonga's next clinic visit, enough for food, enough to breathe for a few days. And no note. She should have been relieved. Instead, she felt watched. When she entered the yard, the sun had gone down, and the first evening chill was creeping in. The main house windows glowed yellow. Someone inside was laughing. The sound hit her wrong. Laughter in that house was rarely innocent. It usually meant pain had already been assigned to someone else. She went first to the back room. Siyabonga was awake, propped against the wall with a schoolbook on his knees. The room was dim, but his face brightened the moment he saw her. You came early. I told you I would. She crouched beside him and pulled a wrapped loaf of bread from her bag. His eyes widened just enough to break her heart. And this, she said, showing him the cough syrup. He stared at the bottle, then at her. How today was kind to us. He did not answer immediately. He had learned from her and from suffering that kindness arriving suddenly was often a story with missing pages. Still he smiled and accepted the bread. She helped him eat a little. Not too fast, not too much. Then she folded the clinic money into the tin box and placed it beneath the bed, where Madlamini would not think to check until she felt like destroying hope again. As Nombulelo turned to leave, Siyabonga reached for her sleeve. You're worried? No. You always say no first when the answer is yes. Despite herself, she smiled. He lowered his voice. Did she do something? Nombulelo did not ask who. In that house there were too many women who could be meant, but somehow they both knew. Nothing I can't handle, she said. That was a lie too, but a necessary one. Children deserved some illusions, especially children who had been denied almost everything else. When she entered the main house, Madlamini was waiting in the sitting room. Not alone. A man sat on the sofa with one ankle over the opposite knee, as comfortable as if he already owned the walls. He was in his 50s, broad in the stomach. Gold ring flashing on his finger shirt, unbuttoned one too many buttons for dignity. His eyes moved over Nombulelo with the slow confidence of a buyer checking livestock. Her skin crawled. "This is Mr. Bieki Hadebe," Madlamini said smoothly. "He has been generous enough to visit." Generous. Nombulelo stood very still. Zanele lounged by the mantel, watching with open delight. Mr. Hadebe smiled. "So this is the girl. Girl. Not woman. Not person." Nombulelo felt something cold settle into her chest. Fear, yes, but beneath it something steadier, a refusal hardening into shape. "I'm not for inspection," she said. Madlamini's face changed instantly. "Mind your tone." Mr. Hadebe chuckled. "Spirit. I like that. It makes the taming sweeter." Zanele covered a laugh with her hand. For one flashing second, Nombulelo imagined crossing the room and shattering that laughter with her bare hands. Instead, she said, "You should leave." Madlamini rose. "Enough." No, Nombulelo said louder now. "Enough." That startled all of them. She turned to Mr. Hadebe. "If someone told you I could be purchased, they lied." His smile faded. Madlamini strode forward so fast the hem of her wrapper snapped around her ankles. "Do you understand what you are throwing away? This man is offering security, respect, a future." Nombulelo looked at her, really looked. And what she saw was not family, not even hatred. Hatred had emotion in it. This was colder. Calculation. Madlamini had measured every weakness in the house and decided which ones could be sold. "Not for me," Nombulelo said. "For you." The slap came hard and fast. Her head turned with the force of it. Pain lit her cheek. Zanele inhaled with pleasure. Mr. Hadebe watched without moving. Nombulelo slowly faced them again. Her cheek burned. Her eyes watered. But her voice when it came was terrifyingly calm. "You can starve me," she said. "You can throw me out. You can lie about me. But you will never make me marry a man I do not choose." Mr. Hadebe stood. There was no embarrassment in him, only offense. Men like him were not insulted by refusal because they were not used to seeing it as a real option. "You are being foolish," he said. Maybe Nombulelo answered. "But I am still saying no." He adjusted his cuffs, looked once at Madlamini, and gave a thin smile. "When hunger finishes teaching her, send word." Then he left. The front door closed. Silence followed. Zanele was the first to break it. "You idiot!" Madlamini did not speak right away. That made Nombulelo more uneasy than the slap had. At last the older woman said, "Very well." 2 simple words. Too simple. Nombulelo knew then that the danger had only changed shape. "You refuse one path," Madlamini continued. "Then you will walk another." Nombulelo's pulse quickened. "What does that mean?" "It means," Zanele said, stepping forward with glittering eyes, "you're coming with us on Saturday." "To where?" Neither woman answered immediately. They looked at each other first, sharing some secret already polished between them. Then Madlamini said, "To the Mokoena engagement celebration." Nombulelo frowned. The Mokoenas were old money Johannesburg elite, the kind of family people lowered their voices for. Their estates appeared in magazines. Their surnames opened doors. "I'm not invited?" Nombulelo said. Zanele smiled. "Of course not. You'll be working." Nombulelo said nothing. Madlamini moved closer and adjusted the collar of Nombulelo's worn dress with false tenderness, like a woman preparing an offering for an altar. You will serve quietly. You will keep your eyes down. You will do exactly as you are told. Important people will be there. Billionaires, politicians, families who matter. And if you embarrass me, you'll do what Nombulelo asked. Madlamini's fingers tightened on the fabric at her throat. I will remind you how fragile Siabonga is. There it was again. The knife they preferred. Nombulelo's face went empty. That frightened Zanele a little. She hid it quickly, but Nombulelo saw it. Cruel people liked tears. They liked shaking voices. They liked begging. A silence that did not surrender felt dangerous to them. At last, Nombulelo stepped back. When do we leave? She asked. Madlamini released her collar. Saturday, early. Nombulelo nodded once and turned toward the back room. Behind her, Zanele laughed softly. Try not to shame us with that face of yours. Nombulelo paused at the doorway, then looked back. I don't shame you, she said. I reveal you. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then she walked away before either woman could answer. In the darkness of the small room, Siabonga was already asleep again, his breathing uneven beneath the blanket. Nombulelo sat beside him and watched the rise and fall of his chest. Saturday, a rich family's engagement, a room where she did not belong, a cousin smiling too much, a threat dressed as opportunity. Every instinct in her whispered the same warning. She was not being taken to serve. She was being led into a trap. By Saturday afternoon, the Mokoena estate looked less like a home and more like a kingdom determined to impress heaven itself. The gates alone were taller than the roof of Madlamini's house. Black iron twisted into gold-tipped spears. Beyond them, the driveway curved through manicured gardens, marble fountains, trimmed hedges shaped into impossible elegance, and rows of imported palms that seemed to have been planted simply to prove that money could command even the earth. Nombulelo stepped out of the catering van with a tray of crystal glasses balanced carefully in both hands. For one breath she forgot her fear, not because the estate was beautiful, because it was obscene. There was something painful about luxury when you had spent the morning counting coins for bus fare and clinic tablets. Something violent about a fountain pouring endlessly while children elsewhere drank from cracked taps. The sunlight flashed on polished stone, on gold railings on the windows of the great white mansion ahead, and Nombulelo felt again that old truth pressing against her ribs. The world did not merely have rich and poor, it had people who suffered and people who decorated themselves with the fact that they did not. Hurry up, barked the catering supervisor. Service entrance, not the front. Nombulelo lowered her eyes and followed the other staff toward the side of the house. Behind her, Zanele emerged from Madlamini's car in a pale rose gown, glowing with the kind of beauty magazines rewarded and men excused too easily. At her side, Madlamini wore embroidered fabric and expensive perfume, performing the role of respectable matriarch so convincingly that only God and the devil could have laughed properly at it. For a brief moment, Zanele glanced toward Nombulelo and smiled. There it was again. That smile that always appeared when a plan was already in motion. Nombulelo looked away first, not from fear, but from caution. In houses like this, danger never arrived wearing its real face. It came powdered, jeweled, and polite. Inside the staff corridors were a different world from the front halls. The white marble gave way to plain, tiled floors. The scent of fresh roses and roasted meat was cut by bleach-hot metal and steam from industrial kitchens. Assistants shouted table numbers. Florists rushed by with last-minute centerpieces. Waiters buttoned cuffs and adjusted black vests. Someone cried because a tray of desserts had collapsed. Someone else swore in a whisper about politicians being harder to serve than royalty. Nombulelo tied on her apron and took her assigned role without complaint. Move between tables. Smile only if spoken to. Never answer back. Never be noticed. That last instruction would have been easier if humiliation were not so skilled at finding her. As the first guests began to arrive, Nombulelo carried champagne, then starters, then linen napkins for a table where two women wearing diamonds larger than prayer beads were discussing charity in voices smooth with self-congratulation. One of them took a single glance at Nombulelo and wrinkled her nose. "Why do they always hire girls who look distressed?" she murmured. The other woman smiled into her glass. "It makes the guests feel generous." Neither bothered to lower her voice. Nombulelo placed the napkins down carefully and moved on. At the next table, a young man in a navy suit let his eyes trail over her face, then her uniform, then her worn shoes. "Wrong entrance, sweetheart," he said to the laughter of his friends. "The staff belong in the back." "I am staff," Nombulelo answered. He laughed harder. Exactly. By then she had learned an important law of the wealthy. When they wanted to wound you, they preferred jokes. Jokes let cruelty travel in public without shame. So she kept walking. She helped an elderly couple find their table. She caught a tray before another waitress dropped it. She brought water to a child who was being ignored by adults, too busy networking. And when one of the floral columns near the staircase began to tilt because a careless worker had dragged a cord across its base, Nombulelo quietly set down her tray, braced the stand, and called for help before it crashed onto the marble. No one thanked her. But one person noticed. Near the entrance to the grand hall stood an older woman wrapped in deep blue silk and dignity. Her silver hair was hidden beneath an elegant head wrap. A carved ivory cane rested in one hand, though the way she held herself made the cane seem ceremonial rather than necessary. Her face was lined, proud and watchful, not one of those rich women who wore kindness as a temporary accessory. This woman's eyes missed very little. Nombulelo recognized her a second before the surrounding whispers confirmed it. Gogo Nandifa Kumalo. Not merely wealthy. Powerful in the old way, the kind of woman whose silence people studied for instructions. As Nombulelo turned to leave, the floral column behind one of the marble steps near the entrance caught the older woman's heel. The movement was small, almost graceful, but one wrong angle would have sent her down hard. No one around her reacted quickly enough. Nombulelo did. She crossed the distance in an instant, set one steadying hand beneath Gogo Nandaifa's elbow, and took the weight before the older woman could fall. For one suspended heartbeat, the hall seemed to pause. Then Gogo Nandifa straightened slowly and looked at her. Their eyes met. The old woman's gaze dropped not to Nombulelo's face, not to her cheap uniform, but to the chain at her throat. The small old pendant Nombulelo always kept hidden had slipped free while she moved. It now rested in full view against the dark fabric of her uniform. Gogo Nandifa's fingers tightened around her cane. Not dramatically, just enough. Shock flickered across her face and vanished so quickly most people would have missed it. But Nombulelo saw it. Years of surviving people's moods had taught her to detect even the smallest fracture in a mask. "Thank you, Gogo," Nandaifa said. Her voice was low, controlled, almost too controlled. "You are welcome, ma'am," Nombulelo replied, stepping back. The older woman kept staring at the pendant. "Where did you get that?" she asked. Nombulelo's hand rose instinctively to cover it. "It belonged to my mother." Something unreadable passed through Gogo Nandifa's expression. Then the moment was broken by a burst of laughter nearby and the arrival of two men greeting the old woman loudly. She straightened at once, her face returning to public calm. "You should put it away," she said softly. Nombulelo frowned. The words felt like more than advice. Before she could ask anything, a voice slashed through the moment. "Nombulelo." It was Zanele. Every head did not turn, but enough did. Zanele approached with the polished fury of a woman angry not because something bad had happened, but because attention had briefly landed on the wrong person. At her side walked Thabiso Mokoena, broad-shouldered, handsome in a tailored charcoal suit, his expression composed in the way of men raised to conceal reaction. He had the face of someone used to being admired without effort. Zanele slid one arm through his and smiled tightly. "What exactly are you doing bothering our honored guests?" Nombulelo stepped back at once. She almost slipped. "I only helped." "Of course you did," Zanele said with a sweetness so false it almost glittered. "Always eager to be seen." Gogo Nandifa's gaze sharpened, but she said nothing. Thabiso looked from Zanele to Nombulelo, then briefly to the pendant, now hidden again. Something in his expression shifted. Not recognition, not yet, but attention. "Is there a problem?" he asked. "No problem at all," Zanele answered too quickly. "Just a servant forgetting boundaries." "Servant." The word landed in the air like a slap disguised as etiquette. Nombulelo lowered her head because she had learned long ago that survival often required performing submission even when your soul refused it. "I apologize if I offended anyone," she said. She meant none of it. Zanele smiled with satisfaction, then turned Thabiso away toward another group of guests. But even as he moved, he glanced back once over his shoulder. Nombulelo felt it, not desire, not pity, curiosity. That was sometimes more dangerous than hatred. The evening unfolded in layers of glitter and poison. Musicians played under hanging lights. Waiters moved like shadows between tables. Politicians greeted businessmen. Influencers posed near flower walls. The engagement celebration was less a family event than a public display of alliances, money, and carefully engineered perfection. And underneath all that perfection, something was moving. Nombulelo felt it in the glances Zanele kept throwing toward her, in the private murmur between Madlamini and a woman from the Mokoena household, in the way two security guards seemed to notice whenever Nombulelo crossed the central hall. A trap was tightening. She just did not yet know its shape. Near sunset, the formal presentation began. A hush spread across the ballroom as a display case was brought forward onto a velvet-covered table. Inside, under warm golden light, rested a diamond necklace so exquisite the room seemed to inhale around it. It was old, intricate, and unmistakably important. A Mokoena family heirloom. Guests leaned closer. Cameras rose discreetly. The host explained its history in tones of practiced reverence passed down through generations, worn by the women who bound powerful families together, a symbol of legacy, trust, and bloodline. Nombulelo watched from the edge of the room, a tray in her hands. She did not care about diamonds, but she cared about the way Zanele looked at the necklace, with hunger, not admiration, hunger. As the applause swelled, the necklace was removed from the display to be privately presented later in the evening. Staff were instructed to clear the surrounding area. Nombulelo turned to obey. That was when Zanele brushed past her. The movement was light, almost accidental. But in that instant, Nombulelo felt it a small impact against her side. Too quick to catch. Too deliberate to be nothing. She turned sharply. Zanele was already moving away, smiling at someone else. Nombulelo's heartbeat quickened. Her fingers tightened around the tray. Every instinct screamed now. Something had just been planted. She set the tray down at the nearest service station and reached for her handbag. Before she could open it, a scream tore through the ballroom. "The necklace," a woman cried. "The Mokoena necklace is gone." Silence crashed down. Music stopped. Guests turned in a wave. Then Zanele's voice rang out clear and horrified, perfectly pitched for an audience. "Check her bag." Time seemed to split open. Nombulelo went cold from scalp to spine. "No," she said at once, but two security men were already moving toward her. Madlamini gasped theatrically. "Nombulelo, tell me you did not?" "I didn't," Nombulelo said. Her voice was steady. That frightened them more than tears would have. The ballroom had gone utterly still. Even the rich liked spectacle when it involved someone lower than themselves. Zanele stepped closer, eyes wide with counterfeit pain. "Then you won't mind if they look?" Nombulelo stared at her, and in that stare she understood everything. The invitation, the smile, the threats, the glances. She had never been brought here to serve. She had been brought here to fall. One of the security guards reached for her bag. Nombulelo caught his wrist. "Don't," she said. The room gasped. "Wrong move," a voice in her mind whispered. Too late. The guard jerked free, snatched the handbag from her shoulder, and opened it in front of the entire room. For one terrible second, nothing happened. Then his hand went inside and came back, holding fire. The diamond necklace blazed in the ballroom light. A collective cry ripped through the guests. Zanele pressed a hand to her chest as if wounded by betrayal. Madlamini whispered loud enough for everyone to hear. "After everything I have done for that girl." Nombulelo stood frozen, not because she doubted herself, because she suddenly understood how easily evil wins when it dresses itself as outrage. Across the room, Thabiso Mokoena was staring at her. And for the first time that night, he did not look entertained. He looked alarmed. For one suspended second after the necklace appeared in the guard's hand, the ballroom did not breathe. Then the noise came all at once. Gasps, accusations, chairs scraping against marble. A woman near the front let out a cry of disgust, as though the theft had happened to her personally. Phones rose into the air. Guests leaned toward one another, thrilled by scandal and morally alive now that someone poorer than them had fallen. Nombulelo stood at the center of it all, still as carved stone. The necklace flashed in the guard's fist like a verdict already signed. "She stole it," Zanele whispered, and somehow her whisper traveled farther than most people's shouting. Thabiso Mokoena did not speak. He was watching Nombulelo too closely for comfort. Across the ballroom, Gogo Nandifa Kumalo's expression had gone unreadable, the kind of silence only the very powerful and the very wounded knew how to wear. Madlamini, meanwhile, knew exactly what role she wanted. She pressed one hand to her chest and staggered a little, performing grief with the precision of a seasoned liar. "I cannot believe this," she said, her voice cracking at all the right places. "After everything I have done for her, after feeding her, after clothing her, after bringing her here to work with dignity." She turned to the guests as if apologizing for the existence of the girl in front of them. "Please, I beg your forgiveness. I did not know she was capable of this." The cruelty of that sentence was not in the accusation. It was in the ownership. Feeding her, clothing her, bringing her, as though Nombulelo were an animal that had escaped its cage and embarrassed the household. Nombulelo lifted her eyes slowly and looked at Madlamini. There was no pleading in her face. That unsettled the older woman for a fraction of a second. "I didn't steal anything," Nombulelo said. Her voice was calm. Too calm for a guilty person. Too calm for a victim, too. The head of security, a thick-necked man with a shaved skull and a habit of mistaking force for authority, stepped closer. "Then explain why it was in your bag." "I can explain how it got there," Nombulelo answered. "I cannot explain why you are all pretending not to see the obvious." A new murmur rippled across the room. People enjoyed innocence only when it was helpless. Once it began speaking clearly, it became inconvenient. Zanele's eyes flashed. "What is that supposed to mean?" Nombulelo turned to face her fully. "You brushed against me near the display." Zanele gave a small laugh of disbelief. "So now you're accusing me I'm saying exactly what happened. That is absurd. Is it?" The room sharpened. The poor were not meant to return fire so cleanly. Zanele took a step forward, face full of trembling outrage, so beautiful it might have fooled someone less experienced with snakes. "You think because you've been caught, You can drag my name into your filth. Nombulelo's gaze did not move. I think you were desperate enough to need someone smaller than you to stand on. For one heartbeat, Zanele's mask slipped. Only one. But Thabiso saw it. Nombulelo saw that he saw it. And that mattered. The head of security lifted a hand to cut through the exchange. Enough. This matter will be handled privately. No, said one of the guests immediately. Not privately. She should be handed to the police. Another added, search her properly. There may be more missing. A man at the back laughed. Of course there are. People like that don't come to these places for the canapés. Several others joined him. Nombulelo felt the laughter strike the room like thrown stones. People like that. It was always fascinating how the rich spoke of the poor as if poverty were a moral odor, something carried in the skin rather than imposed by systems, betrayals, and luckless births. Madlamini moved beside Zanele and lowered her face in shame. Nombulelo, she said, in a tone meant to sound motherly. Please. Stop making this worse. Return what else you took and apologize. Maybe they will show mercy. Mercy. Nombulelo almost laughed. Mercy from the people who had set the trap. Mercy from the woman who had sold every crumb she ever claimed as kindness. Mercy from those who recorded humiliation more eagerly than they offered truth. She looked around the ballroom, at the women in diamonds, at the men in perfect suits, at the staff frozen along the edges of the room, eyes down because they knew too well what happened when the powerful picked a target. At the little circles of excitement forming already guests whispering, smiling, savoring the shame of someone poorer than them. And suddenly a cold clarity entered her. They did not want proof. They wanted performance. They wanted her panic. They wanted tears. They wanted collapse. Instead, she straightened. If any of you cared about the truth, she said, her voice carrying farther, now you would ask who had access to the necklace. You would ask who stood near me. You would ask why a woman with one worn handbag and no way out would steal the most recognizable heirloom in the room and keep it on her person as if she wanted to be caught. That did something to the crowd. Not enough to awaken conscience, but enough to interrupt certainty. The head of security frowned. One older man near the bar muttered, She has a point. Zanele heard it and instantly raised her voice. That is exactly how clever thieves think. They commit the crime and then act too intelligent to be guilty. Thabiso finally spoke. Who handled the necklace after it left the display? All heads turned. His tone was even, but the room listened because power recognized its own. A woman from the Mokoena household. Tall, elegant, and pale with stress, answered quickly. It was in the side preparation room for only a moment before the formal presentation. Who was in that room? Thabiso asked. Family, 2 senior staff members, and security. Nombulelo saw Zanele's shoulders tighten. Small, but real. Was she in that room? Thabiso asked, nodding toward Nombulelo. The woman blinked. No. That changed the air again. Not enough to save Nombulelo, but enough to make the spectacle less clean than Zanele wanted. Zanele turned to her fiancé with hurt filling her eyes. Are you defending her? I'm asking questions. In front of everyone, after she humiliated us. Thabiso looked at her, then at Nombulelo, then at the necklace still in the guard's hand. It is already humiliating, he said quietly. That is why I would prefer not to be wrong. That single sentence landed harder than a speech, because it revealed doubt, and doubt was dangerous to liars. Madlamini jumped in at once, voice sharp with offended righteousness. Surely you are not suggesting Zanele would stage something so vile at her own engagement celebration? No, Thabiso said with a calmness that revealed nothing. I am suggesting that rich people are capable of ugly things too. A few guests looked away. They had not expected the evening's moral lesson to turn toward them. Nombulelo saw Zanele's nails dig into her own palm. The trap was wobbling. not collapsing, just wobbling. And that was enough to make desperate people dangerous. "You all saw the necklace in her bag?" Zanele snapped. "What more do you need?" Context came another voice. It was low, old, powerful. Every conversation in the ballroom stopped. Gogo Nandifa Kumalo stepped forward from the side of the room, her cane tapping once against the marble. The sound was not loud, but it carried authority, the way thunder carries rain long before it arrives. She looked first at the necklace, then at Nombulelo. "I have lived too long," she said, "to trust evidence that arrives in the hands of eager people." No one answered. No one dared. Zanele swallowed. "Gogo Kumalo, with respect, the matter is clear." Gogo Nandifa turned her head and pinned her with a gaze so measured it felt like judgment. "My child," she said softly, "clarity is often the mask worn by lies that are in a hurry." A few guests shifted uncomfortably. Thabiso lowered his eyes for a moment, thoughtful now. The head of security, suddenly less certain of his own role, cleared his throat. "What would you suggest, Gogo? A proper search of the service corridors, a review of staff movement, and no one leaves until we know more." Zanele's face changed. Only slightly, but Nombulelo saw it. Panic. There and gone. And in that instant, Nombulelo knew one thing with absolute certainty. Zanele had not expected resistance from anyone important. She had expected easy cruelty, quick consensus. A poor girl destroyed before anyone valuable had to think too hard. The head of security nodded reluctantly. "Fine. We'll begin." He gestured to two guards. "Take her to the side room." The guests stirred, disappointed that the drama might move out of public view. Nombulelo did not move. "If you touch me again," she said, looking straight at the guard who had grabbed her bag, "do it because you know I'm guilty, not because it pleases people stronger than you." The man hesitated. That hesitation humiliated him more than if she had slapped him. He reached for her arm anyway. Then from outside, beyond the sealed elegance of the Mokoena estate, came the low, synchronized purr of engines. Not one car, several. The sound deepened as the vehicles rolled across the front drive. Guests near the windows turned first. Then others. Headlights swept through the glass like a silent warning. The ballroom's tension shifted. Confused, now pulled toward something arriving from beyond the script of the evening. One valet hurried through the side entrance, face drained of color. He whispered to a Mokoena official. That official paled too. Thabiso frowned. "What is it?" The man looked around the room, suddenly unsure whether he should answer in public. Then he said, "3 Kumalo vehicles have just arrived." A strange hush fell. Even the richest people in the room reacted to that name. Kumalo. Not whispered with celebrity, but with weight. Old money fused to modern empires. Finance, energy, media, influence that moved markets and ministers. Gogo Nandifa's grip tightened on her cane. For the first time that evening, real emotion broke through her control. Not fear. Recognition. Madlamini's face emptied. Zanele looked confused, then uneasy. Nombulelo's pulse turned suddenly wild. Because long before the ballroom doors opened, long before footsteps entered, long before the room understood what was happening, she knew. Not from certainty, from dread. The kind of dread that comes when the past has finally found the present, and you are no longer sure whether rescue will feel like salvation or another wound. The great doors at the end of the ballroom swung open. 3 men entered, all in black, all unmistakably powerful, and all walking straight toward her. The first thing the room noticed was not their faces. It was the way power moved around them, not loud, not theatrical, not desperate for attention the way newly rich people often were. The 3 men who entered the ballroom carried the kind of authority that did not need introduction, because entire industries had already memorized their names. Conversations died before they reached the center of the room. Guests who had spent the evening performing importance suddenly stepped aside without being asked. Sibusiso Khumalo walked in first. Tall, broad-shouldered and grave, he wore a black suit so perfectly cut it looked almost severe. His face was calm, but not soft. He had the eyes of a man who had learned to survive grief by turning it into discipline. Behind him came Luthando Khumalo Lina, sharper, carrying restrained fury in every line of his body. The youngest Amahle Khumalo moved with the smooth confidence of someone who understood cameras' headlines and exactly how fragile public reputations could be. 3 brothers, 3 billionaires, 3 men who could have been received at the estate with speeches and champagne if they had come for celebration. But they had not come for celebration. They had come for Nombulelo. The ballroom seemed to understand that before anyone said a word. The head of security released her arm at once. Sibusiso's gaze landed on that movement and hardened. He crossed the floor without hurry, but with such controlled force that guests retreated from his path as if something sacred or dangerous were passing through. When he stopped in front of Nombulelo, he did not speak immediately. He looked at her face first, at the red mark beginning to rise near her cheek, at the strained stillness in her shoulders, at the humiliation hanging in the air around her like smoke after a fire. Something changed in his expression. Not shock, recognition mixed with pain. Slowly he removed his jacket and placed it around her shoulders. The gesture was simple. It broke the room. A sound went through the crowd, not a gasp exactly, but something more unstable. Confusion laced with fear. Rich people could recover from scandal. They were less prepared for significance. Luthando stepped to Nombulelo's other side, eyes moving quickly over her as if checking for visible injury. Amahle turned, surveyed the room once, and then asked in a voice so cold it seemed to lower the temperature of the ballroom, "Who touched our sister?" No one answered, not because no one knew, because no one wanted ownership of the moment anymore. Zanele's mouth opened, closed, opened again. "Sister!" she repeated, almost laughing, as if disbelief could rescue her from what was happening. "There must be some mistake." Amahle looked at her. It was not a raised voice, not a threat, just a look. Zanele stopped speaking. Madlamini tried next, because liars always believed speed could outrun truth. She stepped forward with wet eyes and trembling hands, already arranging innocence around herself like a shawl. "Sibusiso," she said, as if the use of his first name might imply familiarity. "This is a misunderstanding. We were just—" "Do not," Sibusiso said quietly. That was all. Yet Madlamini went silent so abruptly it was as if someone had struck her. Nombulelo stood inside the circle of the 3 men and felt the room tilt. This was the moment she had imagined too many times and never truly believed would come, not because she had never wanted to be found, because she had. On lonely nights, on hungry mornings, in clinic lines, in the back room where Sayabonga coughed through the dark, in all the cruel spaces where she had wondered if somewhere in the wide, indifferent world anyone shared her blood and would recognize her if they saw her. But imagination was one thing. Reality was another. Reality had faces. Reality had voices. Reality had arrived too late to spare her childhood, and suddenly the ache in her chest was not relief. It was rage trying not to become grief. Luthando saw it first. "You're shaking," he said softer than before. "I'm not." Nombulelo answered. Amahale's jaw flexed. Sibusiso's hands tightened at his sides. Of course she would say that the oldest brother thought. A girl who had survived by standing alone would not know how to collapse safely in front of strangers, not even strangers with her own blood. Thabiso Mokoena stepped forward, then careful alert to the shifting weight of the room. "Sibusiso," he said. "Can you explain what is happening?" Amahle answered, without taking his eyes off the crowd. "Certainly. The woman you were about to disgrace in public is Nombulelo Kumalo. The surname landed like thunder. Nombulelo saw it travel through the ballroom. Shock in widened eyes, fear in stiffening shoulders, memory in Gogo Nandifa's face. Madlamini's knees seemed to weaken. Zanele's hand went searching for Thabiso's arm, but he did not reach back this time. "That's impossible," Zanele said. "She's my cousin." "No," said Sibusiso. "She was your victim." The silence after that felt almost holy. Then Madlamini found her voice again because survival had always taught her to lie before she breathed. "I raised her," she said. "I protected her when no one else came. If she is truly your sister, then I should be thanked, not accused." Nombulelo closed her eyes briefly. There it was. The theft of language. The way cruel people stole even the story of their cruelty and presented it as sacrifice. When she opened her eyes again, Gogo Nandifa was watching her with unbearable intensity. The older woman knew. Maybe not everything. But enough. Sibusiso turned to Madlamini. "You kept a child hidden for years. I sheltered her. You profited from her labor. She lived under my roof. You let her be humiliated tonight. I was protecting this family's name." Sibusiso's restraint cracked not loudly but visibly. And what he asked, "Do you think she is?" Madlamini had no answer that would not destroy her. Luthando stepped forward then and faced the crowd. "My sister has been searched, accused, insulted, and manhandled over a necklace planted in her bag." Murmurs rose instantly. Planted. The word rearranged the narrative in one stroke. Zanele recovered enough to protest. "That is outrageous. Everyone saw a mahle cut across her. Everyone saw the result. That is not the same as seeing the truth." Then he turned to Thabiso. "Your fiancé brushed past Nombulelo moments before the accusation. Security failed to secure the room. Witness statements are already being collected outside. If you would like this solved quietly, I suggest you start valuing facts over embarrassment." Nombulelo looked sharply at him. "Outside, of course. Men like Amahle did not arrive unprepared. The realization should have comforted her. Instead, it left her with another sharp question. If they had been close enough to know something was wrong tonight, how long had they known about her at all? The thought burned. She pulled Sibusiso's jacket tighter around herself, not for warmth, but to keep from shaking. Gogo Nandifa took one step forward. "Show me the pendant," she said. Every eye moved to Nombulelo. For a moment she did not move. Then slowly she reached beneath the jacket and drew the old pendant into view. The room would have seen only old metal, worn smooth by time. But Gogo Nandifa looked as though she had been struck in the chest. Her fingers rose halfway, trembling once before she forced them still. "That was Nomusa's," she whispered. "Nomusa, Nombulelo's mother." The sound of her name in a stranger's mouth broke something open inside Nombulelo with such sudden force she nearly lost her breath. "You knew my mother?" she asked. Gogo Nandifa looked at her for a long moment before answering. "I knew enough to mourn her, not enough to save her." Pain crossed the older woman's face, old and unhealed. That pain did more to convince the room than any speech could have. Thabiso's expression changed completely now. He looked at Zanele not with loyalty, but with dawning horror. "You told me she was some distant poor relative your mother pitied," he said. Zanele swallowed. "Thabiso, please." "You told me she was unstable. She is lying." "She hasn't lied once tonight," he said. That landed hard, because it was true. Nombulelo had been accused, cornered, threatened, dragged, mocked, but every sentence she had spoken had held. Madlamini saw the room turning and panicked. She knew she cried, suddenly pointing at Nombulelo. She knew who she was and said nothing. She hid it. She deceived all of us. Another murmur. This one more complicated, because that part was true. Nombulelo lifted her head. Yes, she said. The room stilled again. Even her brothers turned toward her. Yes, she repeated. I knew. Sibusiso stared. Since when her eyes did not leave Madlamini? Long enough. Luthando's voice was roughened by confusion. Why? The question had weight in it. Not accusation, but hurt. Why would a lost sister stay lost if she had a choice? Nombulelo finally looked at them. At Sibusiso's stern grief. At Luthando's anger. At Amahle's guarded intelligence. Men who looked enough like her mother around the eyes to hurt. And in that moment she understood something terrible. Blood recognized blood faster than trust could, because finding you was never the same as trusting you, she said. The words stunned them. Sibusiso's face emptied first, then tightened. Luthando stepped back as if struck. Amahle's eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in comprehension. Nombulelo kept going because she had carried this too long to soften it now. I found the truth before you found me. I found documents, names, dates. I found out who my mother was. I found out what was taken from her. Her throat tightened, but her voice held. And I found out someone inside the Khumalo family helped bury us. The ballroom seemed to darken around the edges. This was no longer a scandal about a necklace. It was an opening grave. Amahle was the first to recover. Who told you that Nombulelo's eyes moved not to Madlamini, not to Zanele, but somewhere older in memory? My mother did, she said, before she died. Silence. Then very quietly, very carefully, she delivered the wound she had been saving for years. She said the people who destroyed us were not all strangers, and until I knew which of you were family, and which of you were only blood, I would not walk willingly into another beautiful house built on lies. No one in the ballroom moved, no one dared, because the truth had just split into something larger than reunion. The three brothers had found their sister, but she had not come back to them. Not yet. No one in the ballroom spoke for several long seconds after Nombulelo's words. It was not ordinary silence. It was the kind that comes when a room realizes it has wandered into a story much older, uglier, and more dangerous than the entertainment it first came to enjoy. A stolen necklace had become the least important thing in the room. The chandeliers still burned overhead. Soft music still hovered somewhere beyond the sealed tension of the ballroom. Waiters still stood frozen with trays in their hands. But the mood had changed so completely that even the air felt different, thinner, colder, stripped of performance. Sibusiso Khumalo looked at Nombulelo as if he had been given back something precious, and in the same breath accused of failing it beyond repair. Say that again, he said. His voice was controlled. That made it more frightening. Nombulelo held his gaze. My mother did not trust everyone in the Khumalo family. Luthando's jaw clenched so hard a muscle ticked in his cheek. That is not the same as saying one of us betrayed her. I didn't say one of you, Nombulelo replied. I said someone inside your family helped destroy us. Amahle watched her in silence, his expression unreadable. He was the quickest mind in the room, the one already rearranging timelines, names, motives, probabilities. Nombulelo could see it in his eyes. He was not resisting the accusation. He was testing its structure. Madlamini saw the room turning away from her and tried once again to force herself into the center of the story. She is confused, she said sharply. Traumatized people invent villains where they need them. Nombulelo turned her head just enough to look at her. That look held so much contempt that Madlamini almost flinched. You are standing in a room full of your own lies, Nombulelo said. Do not borrow my pain to defend yourself. A murmur moved through the guests. It was subtle, but it mattered. For the first time that evening, Madlamini no longer looked like an aggrieved guardian. She looked what she was, a cornered woman, desperate to stop a door from opening. Gogo Nandifa lifted one hand and the room quieted at once. Enough public noise, she said. If Nomusa's name has entered this room, then nonsense must leave it. Her gaze swept across the ballroom and landed on the Mokoena household manager, the head of security, and finally, Thabiso. You will secure the exits. No one leaves yet. Then she turned to the three brothers. And you will stop looking at this girl as if shock alone is an apology. That landed with the accuracy of a blade. Sibusiso said nothing. He did not defend himself because some truths were too fresh to resist and too old to escape. Gogo Nandifa gestured toward a private receiving lounge just beyond the ballroom. We will speak there. Only those whose names are already stained by this matter. Madlamini opened her mouth. I will not be interrogated like a criminal. You will be, Gogo Nandifa said, if you continue mistaking volume for innocence. No one helped Madlamini after that. No one moved to comfort Zanele either, though her eyes were already shimmering with practiced tears. Rich people were good at abandoning each other the moment protection became expensive. Inside the private lounge, the mood sharpened further. It was a beautiful room, cream walls, carved dark wood oil portraits, expensive rugs, soft enough to silence footsteps. But beauty could not soften the truth gathering there. Nombulelo stood near the fireplace, Sibusiso's jacket still around her shoulders, her body aching now that the immediate threat had passed. Across from her stood the three brothers, Gogo Nandifa, seated in a high-backed chair like a judge too tired for ritual. Thabiso near the bar with a face gone pale, and Madlamini with Zanele at her side, like two women already sensing that lying might no longer be enough. Amale spoke first. What documents did you find? Straight to the center. No pity, no flourish. Nombulelo respected him for that more than she wanted to. In my mother's things, she said. After she died. Sibusiso's face tightened. What things? We searched every official record after the fire. There was nothing. Because you searched official places, Nombulelo answered. Poor women hide truth in unofficial ones. Luthando lowered his eyes briefly. That sentence had embarrassed him, and it should have. Nombulelo continued. My mother left a metal tin with papers wrapped in cloth. Birth documents. A copy of an old trust ledger. Letters she never sent. A photograph. And one page with a name written more than once. What name? Amahle asked. Nombulelo let the silence hold for one beat before answering. Jabulani Kumalo. The reaction was immediate. Sibusiso went still. Luthando swore under his breath. Amahle's eyes sharpened. Thabiso looked from one brother to the next. Who is that? Not who, Luthando said bitterly. What? Gogo Nandifa's cane tapped the floor once. Speak clearly. Sibusiso inhaled slowly. Mfundisi Jabulani Kumalo, our father's cousin. He handled estate restructuring after my father's first stroke. Nombulelo watched the knowledge move through the room. Not surprise exactly. Recognition. The shape of an old doubt finally receiving a face. Madlamini seized on it at once. There you see your own family politics. This has nothing to do with me. Nombulelo laughed then. Not loudly. But the sound was sharp enough to cut the room. Nothing to do with you, she said. You kept me hidden, took money that came in. My name, sold my labor, starved us, and brought me here tonight to be destroyed in public. Madlamini lifted her chin. I kept you alive. You kept me useful. Zanele stepped forward before her mother could answer. You talk as if we owed you something. Nombulelo turned to face her fully. You owed me basic human decency. That should not have been too expensive for your family. Zanele's face flushed. Good, Nombulelo thought. Let the mask crack. Amahle raised a hand not to silence Nombulelo, but to keep the conversation from scattering. The money, he said. What money came in her name? Every eye turned. Madlamini hesitated a fraction too long. That was enough. Nombulelo answered for her. Anonymous envelopes, sometimes clinic deposits, sometimes cash. Not often. just enough to keep hope alive, never enough to free us. Sibusiso looked at Madlamini. Who sent them? She folded her arms. How should I know? You knew enough to take them. I used that money for the household that sheltered her. Luthando took one step forward, fury now fully visible. You stole from a sick child, Zanele snapped. We fed that child. Thabiso finally spoke, and his voice was colder than anyone expected. Stop saying fed as if it erases what you've done. Zanele looked at him with disbelief. You're taking her side. I'm taking the side that does not make me sick. That hit harder than shouting would have. Nombulelo saw it in Zanele's face. For the first time, she looked less offended than afraid. Gogo Nandifa leaned forward. Bring me the papers, she said to Nombulelo. I don't have them with me. Where are they? Nombulelo hesitated. Not because she feared them, because trust still felt like walking barefoot across glass. Amahle noticed. You hid them well. Yes. Good. That one word startled her, not because it was praise, because it assumed intelligence instead of fragility. Gogo Nandifa studied Nombulelo for a long moment, then nodded once as if confirming something private. You were right not to come unguarded. That changed the room again. It was one thing for Nombulelo to accuse the family of hidden betrayal. It was another for Gogo Nandifa, old enough to know the bones beneath the house, to affirm the caution. Sibusiso turned toward the older woman. You knew. Not a question. Gogo Nandifa's mouth thinned. I suspected. Since when? Since the week Nomusa disappeared. The words dropped like iron. Luthando took a step back. And you said nothing. I said enough. Gogo Nandifa answered, but not loudly enough to beat men who had already decided whose version of events was useful. There was no self-pity in her tone, only regret sharpened by age. She looked directly at Nombulelo. Your mother came to me once. Late. Frightened. She told me documents had been altered. She said someone inside the family was moving assets through false custodians and preparing to blame her if anything surfaced. Amale's face changed first. He was already constructing the mechanism. A financial diversion. Sibusiso nodded slowly. Horror spreading now through understanding. The trust. Luthando looked between them. What trust? Amale answered. A children's holding structure tied to the old expansion fund. It was created before the energy merger. If someone siphoned through it and blamed Nomusa removing her and her daughter would erase the cleanest witness. Thabiso stared. You're saying this woman's mother was framed for corporate theft? No, said Nombulelo quietly. I'm saying she was buried beneath it. The room went silent again. Madlamini broke first. This is madness, she said. Financial conspiracies. Dead women, hidden ledgers. You think anyone will believe this because a servant girl says it with tears in her eyes? I haven't cried once, Nombulelo said. That ended whatever little dignity Madlamini still had. Gogo Nandifa turned her head slowly toward her. Did Jabulani pay you? Madlamini's eyes widened. What did he pay you? Gogo. Nandifa repeated to keep the child out of sight. No, too fast. Too loud, too frightened. Zanele reached for her mother's hand. Madlamini shook it off. Amahle noticed everything. Search her accounts, he said to Sibusiso. I will. Madlamini laughed desperately. On what grounds? What? Sibusiso looked at her with a stillness colder than rage. On the grounds that my sister was found in your house half-starved, while anonymous funds disappeared around her for years. Nombulelo should have felt satisfaction. Instead, she felt tired. Tired in the marrow. Tired in the place where little girls stored all the times adults failed them and called it necessity. She turned away slightly, and that small movement made Gogo Nandifa notice the bruise darkening along her cheek. The older woman's eyes narrowed. Who struck her? No one answered. Nombulelo didn't either. She didn't need to. Gogo Nandifa had lived long enough to read silence. Her gaze settled on Madlamini, and for the first time the old woman's disappointment became openly lethal. "You were given a frightened child," she said, "and you chose profit." Madlamini, who had survived for years by bullying those weaker than herself, now found herself under the full moral weight of someone she could not manipulate. She cracked. Not completely, but enough. It was not like that. She said, voice shaking. "I had debts. I had my own daughter to think about. Jabulani said the girl was dangerous to keep close, but more dangerous to throw away. He said if I hid her, there would be help. He said her mother had ruined important men, and the child would only bring more ruin." There it was. Not the full truth, but the door had opened. Thabiso exhaled sharply. Zanele stared at her mother, as if hearing for the first time the cost of the life she had considered normal. Luthando's hands curled into fists. "You sold her!" Madlamini's tears spilled then not from remorse but from collapse. "I did what I had to do." Nombulelo looked at her and felt something colder than hate. "No," she thought. "You did what benefited you. That is not the same thing." Amahle stepped nearer to Nombulelo. His voice lowered now. "Did your mother say why Jabulani wanted her blamed?" Specifically, Nombulelo swallowed. Because she found proof he was moving inheritance assets meant for the youngest branch of the family. Sibusiso frowned. Youngest branch. And then everyone understood at once. The room drew breath together. Nombulelo, the lost daughter, the youngest heir. Her existence had not merely been inconvenient. It had been expensive. The realization settled over the room like smoke after an explosion. Nombulelo was not only the lost daughter of a powerful family. She was the youngest heir in a branch someone had wanted erased. That changed everything. Not the pain she had lived through, not the hunger, not Siyabonga's coughing in the night, not the slap still burning in memory, but it changed the shape of the crime. What had been disguised as misfortune was now standing naked as design. No one spoke for several seconds. Even Madlamini seemed to understand that the ground beneath her had shifted beyond rescue. Sibusiso was the first to move. He took one slow step back, one hand passing over his mouth as if he needed physical restraint to stop himself from breaking the room apart. Luthando turned away and stared at the far wall, shoulders locked so tight they seemed carved from stone. Amahle did not move at all, but his silence had become sharper, more dangerous. He was no longer gathering pieces. He had begun building a case. Thabiso Mokoena looked at Nombulelo with something far heavier than pity now. "It was never about a necklace," he said quietly. "No," Nombulelo replied. "It never was." Gogo Nandifa's cane rested across her knees. Her face had gone old in a different way, not weaker, but more unforgiving. "Jabulani will deny everything she said. Men like him always confuse years without punishment for innocence." Amahle nodded once. "Let him deny it. Denial is useful when records exist." Sibusiso lowered his hand. "Do we still have access to the old trust archives?" "We do," Amahle said. "If they haven't been cleaned." Luthando turned back, fury visible now. "Then we go tonight." But Nombulelo's voice cut across the momentum before it could harden into another story where powerful men rushed forward and called action love. "No!" Every eye turned to her. She was still wearing Sibusiso's jacket. Still bruised, still exhausted. Yet she stood with a steadiness that forced the whole room to slow down. Luthando frowned. No Nombulelo looked from one brother to the next. "You keep speaking as if the most urgent wound in this room is your family name." The words hit cleanly. Sibusiso's face tightened. Amahle said nothing. Luthando opened his mouth, then stopped. Nombulelo went on. "For years all of you had money reach lawyers, influence investigators, and yet I slept in a back room and watched a sick boy fight for breath." Her voice did not rise, but every word landed harder because it did not need volume. So forgive me if I do not mistake your outrage for immediate trustworthiness. A lesser room would have erupted. This one held, because no one could honestly call her unfair. Madlamini made the mistake of trying. "So now you punish them too," she said, grasping at any chance to spread blame wider than herself. "After they came for you," Nombulelo turned her head slightly. The contempt in her eyes was almost unbearable. "This is not punishment," she said. "This is clarity." Then she faced the brothers again. "There is one person who stood beside me when I had no surname anyone respected. One person who shared hunger without using it against me. One person who never made me kneel to earn care." Her throat tightened for the first time that night. Siyabonga. The name changed her face. Not softened it, deepened it. All the room's politics suddenly looked cheap beside that single child's existence. Amahle understood first. "He needs treatment now." "Yes." Sibusiso straightened. "Then he gets it. Not later," Nombulelo said. "Not after your meetings, not after your revenge, not after your family decides what version of this scandal protects the market best." Her eyes burned now, but still she did not cry. Now. Something shifted in Sibusiso then. For the first time since entering the ballroom, he stopped looking only like a wronged, powerful man, and began to look like an older brother being told rightly that arrival was not the same as repair. "You have my word," he said. Nombulelo's jaw hardened. "Words have fed me nothing." He accepted that without protest. "What hospital?" he asked. She told him the name of the public clinic first, then the specialist center that had once given her an estimate she could not afford even to hope for. Amahle was already pulling out his phone before she finished. He stepped aside, speaking in quick, low tones, 2 calls, then a third. Not flashy. Efficient. Nombulelo watched him and felt an emotion she did not want to name yet. Luthando moved toward her. "How bad is he? Bad enough that every month I have had to choose what to postpone." She said, "Medicine, tests, food, transport." His face changed with each word. Nombulelo noticed that. She noticed everything. Good, she thought. Let reality touch you without softening its edges. Thabiso spoke up quietly. "Do you need security at the house?" At first, Nombulelo almost refused on instinct. Then she remembered the tin box, the hidden papers, Siyabonga asleep in the back room under a roof that had never meant safety. "Yes," she said. Madlamini stiffened. "You cannot storm my property like criminals." Luthando turned on her with such open disgust that she recoiled a step. "Property." Amahle ended his call and came back. "An ambulance team can reach the house within 20 minutes. A private cardiology unit is ready to admit Siyabonga tonight." He looked directly at Nombulelo. "No press, no family statements. No one outside this room gets to turn it into spectacle." That mattered more than she expected, because for the first time that evening, one of them had offered help without wrapping it in pride. She gave a small nod. Sibusiso noticed. So did Amahle. Gogo Nandifa rose slowly from her chair. "Then that is the first correct thing done tonight." Madlamini looked around as if still hoping someone would remember she was older, louder entitled to deference. No one did. Her voice sharpened with desperation. "And what about me? You will all just believe this girl and destroy my life." Nombulelo turned to face her. For years she had imagined this moment with anger, with speeches, with the satisfaction of finally making the woman afraid. But what she felt now was stranger. Not mercy. Fatigue beyond hatred. "You destroyed your own life one choice at a time," Nombulelo said. "Tonight is only the evening it became visible." Zanele stepped forward before her mother could answer. Her face had lost its polish. Panic had thinned it, making her beauty look brittle. "You act so righteous!" she snapped. "But you knew, didn't you? You knew you were different. You knew one day you might rise above all of us, and still you played the victim." The accusation was ugly enough to make Thabiso close his eyes for 1 second. Nombulelo stared at Zanele. "You think suffering is theatre because you have only watched it," she said. "I lived it." Zanele's breath shook. "And what now? You want us ruined? You want me crawling?" Before Nombulelo could answer, Gogo Nandifa did. "No child," the old woman said. "She wants what you never offered her. Truth." That silenced Zanele more completely than shouting would have. Amahle checked his phone. "The team is on the way." Nombulelo's body reacted before her mind did. Some locked place inside her loosened not fully, not enough to feel safe, but enough for her knees to nearly give beneath the weight of delayed relief. Sibusiso noticed and moved instinctively, but stopped himself before touching her. Good, she thought. Learn that love sometimes waits for permission. Luthando saw the near falter too, and looked away furious in a different direction now, at the years, at himself, at everyone who had allowed reality to become this thin and cruel. "We're going with you," he said. Nombulelo answered immediately. "No." Again the room stilled. Amahle tilted his head. "Why? Because if 3 billionaire brothers arrive in that yard tonight, the neighbors will turn it into a parade by sunrise." Her voice was practical now, the voice of the woman who had survived the ordinary logistics of poverty, while richer people dramatized principles. "I need Siyabonga protected, not displayed." Amahle's expression shifted. "Respect. You and 1 doctor," she said to him. "Maybe 1 quiet driver. That's all." He nodded once. "Done." Sibusiso looked like it cost him something to remain behind. And you, Nombulelo, held his gaze. "I am going too. You shouldn't have to." A tiny bitter smile touched her mouth. "That has never stopped life before." Thabiso stepped forward, then not close enough to presume just enough to be useful. "My security chief can release full internal footage from the service halls and the presentation corridor. If Zanele planted the necklace, we'll have the angle." Zanele's head snapped toward him. "You would do that to me?" He looked at her as though seeing the true poverty in her for the first time. "I would do that for the truth." She recoiled as if struck. Nombulelo watched them and felt no pleasure, only confirmation. False love always reveals itself when justice becomes inconvenient. Gogo Nandifa moved to Nombulelo, then slower than the others, carrying no urgency because she carried something older. "When your mother came to me," she said softly, "for Nombulelo alone. Though everyone heard, she asked only one thing. Not wealth, not revenge. She said, 'If anything happens to me, let my children one day find each other as human beings, not as claimants.'" Nombulelo's breath caught. The room blurred for 1 dangerous second. Human beings, not claimants. That was the wound, wasn't it? The terror that reunion would become paperwork, inheritance, apology dinners, polished statements, and brothers loving the idea of having found her more than the reality of learning who she had become without them. Gogo Nandifa reached toward her face, paused, then let her hand fall. Even she understood permission mattered. "You are right to test them," the old woman said. Sibusiso, Luthando, and Amahle all heard it and accepted it. That mattered too. Amahle's phone vibrated again. He read the message. "The ambulance is at the gate." Everything in Nombulelo sharpened. The room, the scandal, the inheritance, the betrayal, even Jabulani's shadow, all of it receded before 1 urgent truth. Siyabonga. She took off Sibusiso's jacket and folded it carefully, offering it back. He looked startled. "Keep it." "I don't need symbols," she said. Then after the smallest pause, "I need consistency." Something like pain crossed his face, but also understanding. He took the jacket without arguing. Good, she thought. Learn. Amahle stepped toward the door. "Let's go." Nombulelo started after him, then stopped and looked back once at the room the brothers. The grandmother judge, the broken engagement, the women who had sold and staged and sneered, the men who were only now understanding the cost of what had been hidden. "This is what happens," she said quietly, "when people mistake silence for weakness." Then she left. And for the first time that night, every powerful person in the room understood that the future of the Khumalo family would not be decided by wealth, revenge, or scandal management. It would be decided by whether three brothers could prove themselves worthy of the sister who had survived without them. By dawn, Johannesburg had already begun doing what cities did best. It had turned private cruelty into public currency. Phone videos from the ballroom had spread through the night. A grainy clip of Nombulelo standing still while the necklace was pulled from her bag. Another of the moment the three Khumalo brothers walked in. A third, shakier and more prized than the others, captured Amale's voice, asking, "Who touched our sister?" By sunrise, talk shows, gossip pages, and business blogs were all feeding on the same scandal from different angles. Some called it a society disaster. Some called it a family secret. A few, the rarest and most honest, called it what it was. A public execution interrupted by the truth. But none of that mattered to Nombulelo at first. Not while Sayabonga lay in a private hospital room with clean sheets, steady monitors, and air that did not smell like dust and leaking pipes. She stood beside his bed in the pale blue quiet of morning exhaustion, sitting deep in her bones. He was asleep now, sedated after a long night of tests, oxygen steady at his nose, one small hand resting outside the blanket, as if even in sleep he expected to be moved again. A doctor had explained the condition in careful, expensive language. There would be more tests. A treatment plan. Possibly surgery sooner than expected. For the first time, the conversation had not ended with numbers Nombulelo could never reach. For the first time, help had arrived before hope had died. She should have felt peace. Instead, she felt wary gratitude, the kind that comes when life has trained you to expect that every blessing will eventually present a bill. A soft knock sounded at the door. Amahle entered first, carrying coffee. He guessed she would not want, but brought anyway. Sibusiso followed, grave and sleep-deprived in yesterday's clothes. Luthando came last, shoulders still charged with unspent anger. None of them spoke immediately. They all looked at Sayabonga. The silence this time was different from the silences in the ballroom. Not dramatic, not dangerous, human. "He asked for you twice before they put him to sleep," Amahle said quietly. Then he asked if the room was really his. Nombulelo let out a breath that trembled at the edge. "He's not used to softness." Sibusiso lowered his eyes. That sentence cut deeper than accusation. Luthando stepped closer to the bed. "He's small. He's tired," Nombulelo corrected. "There's a difference." Luthando nodded once, accepting the rebuke. Good. She was beginning to learn that the brothers could be taught, if not yet trusted. Amahle set the coffee on the table by the window. "The footage is clear." Nombulelo turned. He handed her a tablet. On the screen was a silent corridor clip from the estate. Staff moved in and out. Waiters passed with trays. A guard crossed left. Then Zanele appeared, elegant and quick, pausing near the service station where Nombulelo had briefly set down her handbag. She glanced once over her shoulder, opened the bag, slipped something inside, and walked away, smiling. The video ended. No one in the room spoke. Nombulelo stared at the frozen image of Zanele's hand halfway inside the bag. There it was. Not suspicion, not instinct, not a poor girl's word against a rich girl's tears. Proof. For a strange moment, she felt nothing at all. Then came the heat, not the wild heat of revenge. Something colder, something that tasted like the end of waiting. Sibusiso broke the silence. "The police have the file. So do the Mokoena's lawyers." Nombulelo looked up. "And Madlamini, in custody for questioning," Amahle said. "Financial records are already being pulled." Luthando's mouth hardened. She's finished. Nombulelo returned the tablet. No, she said. She's exposed. That is not the same thing. The brothers looked at her. She went on. People like her survive by changing masks. She will cry, pray, claim she was desperate, claim she was manipulated, claim she did what she did for family. Her voice flattened. And many people will want to believe her because people prefer a sinner who sounds familiar to a victim who speaks too clearly. Amale's eyes sharpened with quiet approval. Then we won't rely on outrage, good Nombulelo said. Rely on records. Sibusiso reached into a leather folder and laid several copies on the small hospital table. Bank transfers, shell accounts, old trust movements. Clinic deposits that had been rerouted cash withdrawals that matched dates. Nombulelo remembered all too well the weeks. Food vanished, medicine was postponed, rent threats multiplied. Jabulani's name appeared nowhere directly, of course. Men like him hired distance, but the pattern was visible. Anonymous support for Nombulelo and Siyabonga had repeatedly passed through accounts linked to Madlamini, then fractured into household spending Zanele's tuition cosmetics boutiques, and finally a smaller but steady chain leading toward a consulting entity previously tied to Jabulani's office. A web. Old, ugly, deliberate. Nombulelo looked at the papers and felt her mother's absence like a hand at her throat. Nomusa had seen this, understood enough of it to become dangerous, and they had buried her beneath lies because numbers mattered more to them than a woman and child. Luthando saw her face change. We'll make him pay. She looked at him. Will you? She asked. The question stopped him, not because it was hostile, because it was honest. We have more power now than we did then, Sibusiso said. You had more power than I did. Then Nombulelo replied. That landed. No one defended it. Good, she thought. Let truth remain uncomfortable. It was the only thing in this story that had earned the right to stay. There was another knock. This time it was Gogo Nandifa. She entered without ceremony, dressed simply now, as though she had no interest in costumes after the night before. In one hand she carried a sealed envelope, in the other her carved cane. I have come with two things, she said, a truth and a consequence. Amahla pulled a chair for her. She ignored it and remained standing. The truth first, she said, looking at Nombulelo. Your mother came to me 3 weeks before the fire. She was carrying evidence and fear in equal measure. She told me Jabulani had altered succession structures tied to the youngest line. She believed he intended to erase you not by killing you himself, but by making your existence too inconvenient to protect. Sibusiso's face went white with contained fury. Gogo Nandifa continued, her voice steady, though age roughened its edges. I told her to bring the papers to me the next morning. She never arrived. Nombulelo did not move. The room seemed to hold itself around her. I searched quietly, Gogo Nandifa said. Not quietly because it was right. Quietly because powerful families often mistake silence for strategy. Her eyes lifted to the brothers. That cowardice belongs to my generation. Do not inherit it. No one in the room dared answer lightly. The consequence, she said, holding out the envelope, is this. Amale took it, opened, it scanned the contents, then looked up. It's a letter of formal resignation, he said. From Jabulani. Effective immediately. Luthando barked out a humorless laugh. He thinks he can disappear. No, Gogo Nandifa said. He thinks leaving first lets him narrate the leaving. Nombulelo finally spoke. Where is he? Sibusiso answered. Attempting to board a private flight this morning. And a flicker crossed Amahle's mouth. He did not succeed. That brought the first small, hard satisfaction into the room. Not joy. Alignment. The universe had begun at last to stop leaning entirely toward the cruel. Later that afternoon at the Mokwena estate, the second public reckoning began. Not with spectacle, with law. The engagement between Thabiso and Zanele was formally dissolved before both families and legal witnesses. There was no music this time, no flowers, no illusion of romance, only papers, signatures, cameras at the gate, and the brittle remains of people who had mistaken status for safety. Zanele arrived in dark glasses and white rage. Thabiso stood across from her, composed but altered. He no longer looked like a groom from a wealthy magazine spread. He looked like a man being forced to admit that vanity had almost made him an accomplice. When Nombulelo entered with the Kumalo brothers, every conversation in the room died. Zanele looked up and stiffened, not because Nombulelo had arrived in expensive clothes she had not. She wore a simple dark dress borrowed from the hospital social office and carried herself with the same plain dignity she had always possessed. That was what made it unbearable. Zanele had lost, and Nombulelo had not needed transformation to prove her worth. Madalamini was brought in separately under supervision for the financial hearing. Gone was the embroidered arrogance, the moral performance, the raised chin of a woman. Certain poverty would always protect her crimes from scrutiny. Today she looked smaller, older, but not pitiful. Never pitiful. Some people used hardship to deepen humanity. Others used it as an excuse to abandon theirs. The lawyers laid out the evidence, the video, the diverted funds, the false declarations, the account links, the statements from catering staff who had finally found courage after power shifted. One by one, the lies lost their costumes. Zanele tried crying first, then offense, then denial, then blaming her mother. Madlamini blamed Jabulani. Jabulani, through legal counsel, claimed ignorance, manipulation, and poor memory. Watching them was like watching rats climb over one another in a flooding pit. At last, the presiding legal officer turned to Nombulelo. "Do you wish to make a statement?" The room leaned toward her. Even the camera crews outside the glass seemed to sense the weight of it. Nombulelo stood. For one brief second, she saw again the girl on the marble floor. The phones lifted the necklace in the guard's hand, the room already deciding her worth by the worn fabric of her life. Then she looked at Madlamini, at Zanele, at Thabiso, at the families, the lawyers, the servants, pretending not to listen, the wealthy witnesses who had laughed first and doubted second. And she spoke. "My mother died with the truth trapped in her mouth because powerful people decided her life was cheaper than their comfort." The room went still. I grew up being told to lower my eyes, lower my voice, lower my hopes. I was taught that gratitude meant silence, that survival meant accepting humiliation as rent for being poor. Her eyes moved to Madlamini. I was fed with one hand and robbed with the other. Then to Zanele. I was invited into rooms only when someone needed a target. Then to the wider room. And many of you were ready to believe the worst about me, not because the evidence was strong, but because my poverty made the lie easy for you. No one interrupted. No one dared. Nombulelo's voice deepened, steadier with every word. "I am not here to destroy anyone with anger. The truth will do enough of that on its own. I am here so that what was done to my mother, to me, and to a sick child under that roof will no longer be called misunderstanding." Her chin lifted. "Call it by its real name. Greed. Silence." Then something unexpected happened. One of the household staff in the back began to cry. Not loudly. Just one broken sound that escaped before she could swallow it. And that sound cracked the room more deeply than applause ever could have. Because it meant someone powerless had heard power finally speak in the language of justice. When the hearing ended, Madlamini was remanded for fraud, theft, child neglect, and identity concealment pending fuller charges. Zanele faced criminal conspiracy and public defamation claims. Jabulani's offices were sealed. Thabiso walked away from the estate without once looking back. Outside, the cameras surged. Questions flew. Nombulelo did not answer them. She turned instead to the brothers beside her. And for the first time, the people who had mocked her lowered their eyes first. A week later, the city had moved on to newer scandals. That was one of the cruelest and kindest things about the world. It never stayed long enough inside your suffering to understand it fully, but it also never stayed long enough to own you forever. The hashtags faded first. Then the talk shows found fresher disasters. The gossip pages replaced Zanele's tears with someone else's betrayal. Business commentators turned Jabulani Kumalo's downfall into charts and market forecasts. Even the ballroom videos, once treated like public treasure, began sinking beneath the weight of newer outrage. But some things did not fade. Sayabonga's heartbeat no longer rattled like a warning inside every quiet room. That remained. Nombulelo stood by the hospital window and watched him laugh with a nurse over a puzzle book, and sometimes the sight still felt unreal enough to hurt. The surgery had been difficult, but successful. The doctors spoke now in a different tone, not cautious pity, not apologetic limitation, but measurable hope. Recovery would take time. Strength would return slowly. There would be medicines, reviews, rest, and careful routines. But for the first time, the future did not feel like a locked gate. It felt like a path. Sayabonga looked up from the bed and grinned. The scar of sickness was still on him, but life had begun to reclaim territory. "You're doing that thing again," he said. Nombulelo turned from the window. "What thing? The one where you stare like the wall owes you money." The nurse burst out laughing. Nombulelo smiled despite herself. "That is a very rude thing to say to the person who brought you fruit." "You brought apples," Sayabonga said. "That is not fruit. That is punishment." Now all three of them laughed. The sound startled her, not because it was rare, because it was easy. Easy joy had once felt like something that belonged to other people's houses. Now it was standing in the room with clipped fingernails, hospital socks, and a boy who had survived long enough to become mischievous again. Later that afternoon, after the nurse left and Sayabonga drifted into a nap, Nombulelo stepped into the hallway and found the three Kumalo brothers waiting there. Not in suits this time, not with lawyers, not with bodyguards crowding the walls, just three men who seemed for once uncertain in a way money could not solve. Sibusiso stood first. Luthando leaned against the far wall with folded arms. Amahle sat in one of the plastic corridor chairs, a paper cup of untouched coffee in his hand. None of them rushed her. That mattered. Amahle looked up. "He insulted the hospital apples too." "He did." Amahle nodded gravely. "That means he's healing." A small smile touched Nombulelo's mouth. Sibusiso saw it, and something tender and painful moved across his face before he hid it. "We wanted to speak to you," he said. Nombulelo folded her arms lightly. "Then speak. Direct. No ceremony. No pretending this was easier than it was." Sibusiso accepted the terms. "We have secured a house," he said, "close to the specialist center. Quiet, private, staffed only if you approve every person. It's yours for as long as you need." Nombulelo listened without answering. Luthando added, "And Sayabonga's education, treatment, therapy, everything covered. A trust," Amahle said. "Not charity. Protected. Transparent. You control access." That last part was not accidental. He had chosen the word transparent for her. She noticed. Good, she thought. Learn the shape of what was stolen. Sibusiso took a slow breath. There is also the family estate. There it was. The grander offer. The symbolic one. The house of blood. Nombulelo held his gaze and saw him understand even before she spoke that this was the wrong first step. No, he nodded once. No defensiveness, no wounded pride, just acceptance. That mattered too. I thought you would say that, he admitted. Then why offer? Because I did not want you to think we were ashamed to bring you home. The sentence landed somewhere deep. Not enough to heal, but enough to reach. Nombulelo looked down the corridor toward Siyabonga's room. A home is not a place people invite you into after your suffering becomes expensive to ignore. None of them argued. Luthando's eyes lowered. Amahle stared into his coffee. Sibusiso stood very still. At last, Amahle said quietly, "Then tell us what a home is to you." Nombulelo was silent for a moment. Then she answered, "A place where care is not used as leverage. A place where a child does not have to earn medicine with obedience. A place where truth is not hidden to protect the comfort of powerful people." She looked at each of them in turn. "A place where I do not have to wonder whether love will turn into ownership the second I say no." The corridor held that truth with them. At last, Sibusiso said, "Then we will build from there. Not argue, not convince. Build." That was the first time she heard in him something that sounded less like authority and more like humility. Weeks passed. Johannesburg returned to itself in all its contradictions. Glass towers and broken pavements, private clubs and crowded buses, money flowing above, suffering like a river refusing to touch the ground. But inside one restored property on the edge of an older neighborhood, another kind of life began. Nombulelo chose the house herself, not in the richest district, not hidden behind gates designed to erase the world. She chose a spacious but modest building near the community where she and Siyabonga had lived close enough that children still shouted in the lane outside and women still called to each other over fences in the evening. She refused marble that echoed too much like humiliation, refused staff uniforms, refused rooms so large they felt like monuments to emptiness. Instead, she chose light. Open windows, a kitchen big enough for shared meals, a small garden where Siyabonga could sit when he was strong enough and complain about vegetables with proper dramatic dignity. And then, in a decision that unsettled many wealthy advisers, and pleased her greatly for that reason, she used part of the recovered funds to establish the Nomusa Foundation. Not a vanity project, not a gala machine for rich women in satin speeches, a real foundation for abandoned children, for women trapped in coercive households, for emergency medical intervention where money had become a weapon, for legal support when family matters were merely crimes with better branding. Sibusiso handled the structure and made every document visible to her. Amahle built the media shield around it so the foundation would not become a circus of sympathy branding. Luthando funded the first 3 satellite clinics with a ferocity that looked almost like repentance. Nombulelo watched all of it carefully, not suspicious of every breath now, but still awake. Trust, she was learning, did not return like lightning. It returned like healing in damaged muscles. Slow, painful, proven only through repetition. One evening, Gogo Nandifa came to visit. She arrived without spectacle, wearing deep green, this time her cane tapping softly against the front steps as twilight folded over the yard. Siyabonga, stronger now, and full of improved insolence, greeted her at the door and informed her that hospital food should be a crime. Gogo Nandifa listened gravely and agreed. Then she asked if Nombulelo would walk with her in the garden. The evening air held that soft warmth that comes after a hot African day has finally exhaled. Somewhere beyond the fence, a radio played low. Children laughed in the street. The world for once sounded ordinary. Gogo Nandifa stopped beside the small patch where new seedlings had just begun to take root. "Your mother wanted this," she said. Nombulelo looked at her. This, not the money, not the scandal, not men falling from power. The old woman's lined face softened. She wanted her children to find one another after the lies, but she used to say something else too. Nombulelo waited. Gogo Nandifa smiled faintly. She said, "If they ever find each other, let them come as people who have learned kindness the hard way." Nombulelo's throat tightened. She believed they would find me. She believed truth has strange patience. For a while they stood in silence. Then Gogo Nandaifa said, "You do not have to forgive quickly. I know. You do not have to return to the family house. I know. You do not even have to call them your brothers until the word stops feeling like a theft." That one undid something inside her. Not dramatically, just enough. Nombulelo looked down at the seedlings pushing through dark soil and thought of all the things that had survived burial. Her mother's truth. Siabonga's heart. Her own dignity. Maybe family too, if it was asked to grow properly, instead of being forced open like a locked gate. The test came quietly a few days later. No cameras, no lawyers, no speeches, just a meal. Sibusiso cooked badly, but with solemn determination. Luthando argued with a stubborn pot as if it had insulted his ancestors. Amala claimed he was supervising while contributing nothing except expensive bread and sarcastic commentary. Siabonga, now moving carefully, but with far more energy, declared himself the official taster and future kitchen ruler of the house. Nombulelo stood in the doorway and watched them. No one noticed her at first. That was what made it real. They were not performing repentance for her approval. They were simply there, awkward, trying, imperfect human. Sibusiso burned the onions. Luthando denied it was his fault. Amahle laughed so hard he nearly dropped the plates. Siabonga betrayed all of them by announcing that Nombulelo cooked better than everyone in the room combined. And something warm and dangerous rose in her chest. Not surrender, not forgetting, something gentler, a belonging that did not demand blindness. Amale turned then and saw her watching. His expression softened. "You can still refuse to eat this," he said. "In fact, I recommend it." She laughed. A real laugh. The room changed around it. Luthando grinned in open relief. Sibusiso looked down for a second, collecting himself. Even Siabonga beamed like a child who had decided the universe might finally be worth forgiving. They sat together at the table soon after. The meal was uneven. The bread was too fancy for the food. The stew was over-salted. The chairs did not match. The night outside hummed softly around the house, and yet Nombulelo felt something there she had never found in grand halls, guarded estates, or rooms where wealth shouted from every surface. Safety, not complete, not magical, but real enough to touch. Conversation drifted from Siabonga's school plans to the Foundation's first intake cases, then to whether Amahle had ever done honest work in a kitchen in his life. He claimed emotional support was labor. Luthando called that the speech of a spoiled prince. Sibusiso quietly reached for the salt, realized he had over-salted the stew himself, and set it back down without comment. Nombulelo saw it and smiled. Then, in the middle of that simple, mismatched healing meal, she did something none of them expected. She looked up. At Sibusiso, at Luthando, at Amahle. And she said softly but clearly, "My brothers are terrible cooks." The room went still, not with tension, with wonder. Sibusiso shut his eyes briefly. Luthando laughed once, almost like a man who had been punched by joy. Amala looked away and covered his mouth with one hand, but not before she saw the shine in his eyes. No one made a speech after that. No one ruined it by reaching too fast. They simply kept eating. Outside, the night deepened over Johannesburg. Somewhere in the city, people still lied, still bought silence, still mistook poverty for weakness and power for worth. But inside that house, another truth had taken root. Justice had come. Not perfectly, not without scars, but it had come, and healing slower and quieter than revenge had come with it. Nombulelo had not won because she became rich. She had won because the truth survived long enough to be spoken, because cruelty was finally named in daylight, because a sick child was saved, because greed did not get the last word, And because the girl everyone mocked chose not to become hard in the shape of what had hurt her, she became something rarer. She became whole.